Sora and Shiro had made their way to Ocean in an effort to help two of the Exceed that were on the brink of extinction. Exceed rank 12, the Dampier, and Exceed rank 15, the Siren. They had accepted the terms of the Queen's game and entered into her dream that was shaped as a romance game, to which Ino Hatsuse took the lead, confessing his love to the Queen, if you can call it that, and ultimately losing the game. Upon being asked if he would continue, Sora declared, "Why would I, when we've already won?" And then, with just a brief gesture of her will, Jibril shattered the dream and the game entirely, much to everyone's surprise who waited outside the game. But what was even more surprising was the words that Sora spoke when he returned from the dream. "It's check. Looks like we win." He explained to Amala that they had simply saved and exited the game. She never specified that they couldn't. And Blank explains that, well, when declaring something by the Covenants, you need to be very clear with your wording, otherwise there are loopholes that can be exploited. At that point, Sora asks Jibril to bring back the air, and Jibril does so, much to Plum and Amala's surprise. Jibril had simply compressed all of the air that she had initially brought with them when they arrived at Ocean, compressed it to the point where no one was able to notice it, and now she just expanded it out again. It is notable that Siren can survive outside of the water, it's just that while they are in the water, that is when their charm effect can take hold. They are beloved by the sea, and so when they are in the sea, that's when their spirits attract all other spirits, so even though Jibril had forced all of the water out of the room by expanding the air, Amala is still fine. She just doesn't have the charm effect active right now, not that it's really important at this point in time. Immediately upon the air returning, the Shrine Maiden, who had stayed silent up until now, except for when she was inside the dream, her shoulders heaved and she finally was able to breathe. Her skin glowed crimson and a steam of blood evaporated from her body. She nearly collapsed from exhaustion, as it is revealed that she had been using her blood break the entire time they were in Ocean, withstanding 20 atmospheres of pressure, being 200 meters below the sea, by brute force. They figured that when Plum had used the breathing spell on everyone there, that there was also going to be some other unintentional side effects with it, like jamming the werebeast's senses. So they made sure that the Shrine Maiden wasn't under the influence of Plum's spell, and so her senses were not dulled. So she was able to tell if anyone around them was lying. And with Sora's prompting, the Shrine Maiden reveals that Amala actually has no intention to wake the Queen of the Siren at all. And in fact, the promise that she made, the reward that they would have upon waking the Queen, was complete malarkey as well. That was BS. The Shrine Maiden then sneered at Plum, saying that it is no idle boast when it is said that I am the strongest among werebeasts. And based on what we just saw in the beginning of this chapter, that's easily understandable. She has been underwater for quite some time. I don't know if it's been like 30 minutes, an hour, multiple hours, but she's been withstanding all of the pressure of the sea just with her own body. There has been no spell to take away the pressure, no nothing. Just with her sheer blood break and supposedly able to hold her breath for that long, I have no doubt that she is in fact the strongest among werebeasts. And Jibril also confirms that while they were in the game, Plum's spell, the guaranteed win that Plum supposedly had, did in fact activate properly, and the Queen did receive the effects of the spell. And yet, Ino still lost the game. Sora had considered that the spell might have been a fake, but that's why they had tested it on the Shrine Maiden to begin with. And so, Sora, after thinking for a moment, turns to both Amala and Plum and calls them out. "Did you really think that you could eat us for lunch?" To which both Amala and Plum tense up. A tell that, of course, Sora would so easily spot. Sora had caught on to their game, and so he simply just goes to leave. Amala tries to remind him, "We still have Ino. Should you really be leaving right now?" And Sora turns to her and glares, saying that Of course we can leave. You know what will happen if you touch him, right? We'll be back, Siren. Don't you think you can play dumb around me? Underestimating us is going to cost you. And with that, Sora asks Jibril to warp them all back to the beach. Before they do, Plum runs after them, saying, "Please, wait." And Sora turns to Plum and is like, "Oh, good call, Dampier. Are you done playing the pitiful victim?" To which Plum shies away, but still goes with them. And then they all go back to the beach, which they end up feasting upon tropical fish and acting like they don't really have a care in the world, at least momentarily, much to the confusion of Steph. Jibril is there dicing up the fish that was brought with her when she shifted from Ocean back to the beach, and the Shrine Maiden, Shiro, and Sora are just chowing down, enjoying the meal. Izuna, though, is sitting off to the side, and further away still is Plum, with her head held low. But Steph is the one confused by everything going on. Like, what exactly happened here? And Sora puts it bluntly. Well, Plum just tried to play us. From the very beginning, Plum had been misleading them. And Sora goes on to say that from the start, Plum's story was fishy through and through. We're in trouble, but we have a guaranteed way to win. Please come save us. Yeah, right. Wouldn't it just be so much more enticing to lie that you had a sure win, lure them into an impossible game, and then chow down upon them, on the victims that have just lost and forfeited everything by the Covenants? Or at least that's what Sora had thought, but there was one catch. Plum, when she arrived, wasn't actually lying. When Plum's story was first being told, Izuna was in the room, and she wasn't reacting to Plum's words. And then Sora and Shiro brought Plum in front of the Shrine Maiden, and had Plum say the exact same things again. And again, the Shrine Maiden did not sense a lie in Plum's words. And that's because Plum had worded everything that she had said in a way that wasn't lying. But what isn't a lie is not necessarily the truth either. Even though Plum wasn't lying, though, it still seemed fishy. Why ask for help if you have a sure win? And then Sora goes on to mention that when they were told to wager everything by the Covenants, Steph was all in their faces. She was opposed to it, because why would you wager everything? Why would they shoulder that much risk when, Siren and Dampier were the ones asking for help? And Sora says, Steph, you were absolutely right. The only reason I brushed you off was to get Amala and Plum to reveal their hand. But Sora then goes on to reveal what exactly it was that was nagging Steph. Because she couldn't really put her finger on it at the time, why she felt that this was such a bad idea to take on that game, to wager everything on that. Sora compares the Queen's game to betting on a horse race. In that situation, there are two games going on. There's the actual race in and of itself, where the jockeys of the horses are each trying to win the actual race, and then there are the individuals in the stands who are betting on the horses. There's going to be a reward for the jockeys who end up winning the race, and then whoever bet on the correct horse is also going to get a reward. It's a double game. There are two games going on. But in the Queen's game, every single person who enters into the dream is a participant in this race. Each of them is trying to win the Queen's love and wake her up. But they each wagered everything on themselves. They're both the ones in the race as well as the ones betting on it. And the reward that was promised to them if they would win is simply if their bet paid off, if their bet was right. But what if they actually did win the race? What was their actual reward as one of the participants of that race? That was never mentioned. And that is something that Plum could not mention, because Plum could not lie. At least not in front of anyone who could detect a lie, such as the werebeasts. So the plan that Amala had come up with was to use the Queen's game as bait, to lure in humanity, and when they would fail that game, have them wager everything by the Covenants, which includes the race piece. When they lost, that would default to Siren, and now Siren would have an entire other race to feast upon. They would save themselves from extinction by chowing down on humanity. But Plum actually took this one step further. Plum's spell, believe it or not, was actually a spell to make someone fall in love. And it had activated properly. Plum actually did want to wake up the queen. But here's the catch. Regardless of who was the one who pressed that little button to use Plum's spell to wake up the queen, if the queen did actually fall in love, if she did wake up due to Plum's spell, then it would be Plum who woke up the queen. Regardless of who used it, it would be the Dampier that won. That's why Plum participated in the game in the first place. Plum had actually double-crossed Siren, trying to wake up the queen, even though Amela just wanted to use the game as bait. But still, Plum could not lie. Plum couldn't let on that there were two agendas at play. So when Plum had initially come to Sora and Shiro asking for help, all Plum said was, "Please save our race." That is a very broad statement, but what Plum was actually meaning was to save her own race, to save Dampier, not both races, because you have to wonder, what would make Plum, make Dampier think that emancipation, that freedom was right at their fingertips? What would lead Plum to try to betray Amela? Well, that's because the actual reward for winning that race, the reward that was never mentioned, was actually what the queen had bet on her game. She had also wagered everything by the covenants. This is why Amela wants to maintain the status quo. That is why she does not want the queen woken up. And if Plum did succeed in waking up the queen, then everything that the queen possessed would default to Dampier, including the rights that Dampier had lost all those years ago when the covenants were first put into place. The Dampier would be free, and they would then be able to prey upon whoever they pleased at that point in time, trick others into game, not be at the mercy of the idiot fish that are the Sirens. But still, Plum had a contingency. Even if her spell didn't end up working, and Amela won the game, that they weren't able to wake up the queen, then humanity would default to Siren. And so Siren would have a whole other race to feed upon, and so Dampier, especially their last male remaining member, wouldn't need to be consumed by virtue of having many other livestock for the Siren to prey upon. Either way, it is a win-win for Plum. This much of Plum's plan, Sora and Shiro had already figured out before even setting foot on the beach. But they actually had no proof. And so, this is where they decided to have some fun. And upon saying this, Sora reveals everything that actually happened on the beach. They dragged Plum out to the beach in the middle of the day in order to sap her power by forcing her to use the spell to reflect the sunlight, and with no way to replenish her power, it was just continually drained. They then had the Shrine Maiden test her blood break underwater under the guise of fooling around with Jabril, to make it seem like, you know, her and Jabril were playing around, that she was using her blood break to attack her, which I'm guessing there was some genuine animosity there, to be honest, but also having her jump from the bottom of the sea up into the air, it let her test whether, underwater, if her blood break, she could activate it without the blood being expelled from her body. Thanks to the 20 atmospheres of pressure, thanks to the extra pressure put onto her by being underwater, she could activate her blood break without the blood actually being expelled. And that's why she was able to go undetected through all that time in Ocean. They also had Jabril, while on the beach, locate Ocean. And then they waited until nightfall to give time for the Shrine Maiden to recover her stamina after using and testing her blood break against Jabril, while also having Shiro use her petting ability to reorient the spirits in the Shrine Maiden's body and help her recover. They then had Jabril shift them to Ocean instead of waiting for the ship that the Dampier had arranged for them, which was most likely a trap. And so, when they got to Ocean, since Plum's energy had been drained by being out in the sun all day, it created a situation where Plum had to go to the Siren to get more blood. And this gave an opportunity for Jabril to compress all of the air that they brought with them and hide it from Dampier and Siren, as well as having Jabril jam the spell that Plum had put on the Shrine Maiden to help them all breathe underwater. And then they were able to bring the Shrine Maiden in front of Amela all the way to the Queen, where she was not inhibited by Plum's spell. She could use her blood break and have the full capabilities of her senses to be able to detect if anyone around them was lying. Because they knew that there was no way that they would be able to get all of them into the Queen's game without telling a lie. Because Amela and Plum had to get Sora and Shiro to wager everything by the Covenants. And when they thought that the werebeast's senses were dulled, they now thought that they could freely lie. But the joke is on them, because Sora and Shiro had taken everything into account. But this also means that everything that happened in the beach episode of No Game No Life is actually plot relevant and pre-planned out. To heck with all those isekai anime that just have the useless fan service episode that could be taken out of the show and it wouldn't change a thing. No, in No Game No Life, everything is plot relevant, everything has deeper meaning. But from here, Sora genuinely praises Plum's plan, that it was a genuinely good strategy from a weaker position. Sora doesn't give this praise lightly. He genuinely thinks pretty highly of Plum's plan, but there's also something that Plum didn't take into account. Plum was actually overconfident. If the enemy of the strong is the weak, then the enemy of the weak is the weaker. A fool who knows that he's a fool is much more dangerous than a fool who thinks he's smart. Plum is a fool who thinks he's smart, because Amela, the siren that Plum had thought so little of, had taken her betrayal into account. Amela knew that Plum would betray her. Just thinking about it for a moment, if Amela thought that there was even a 1 in a million chance that anyone would succeed in waking up the Siren Queen, the queen who had bet everything that she possessed on this game, then Amela never would have agreed to it. Which means that Amela thinks there is no possible way that anyone could beat this queen's game, even using the cheat that Plum came up with. Amela is actually quite cunning, contrary to what the Sirens are known for. That is why you never underestimate your opponent. Something that Plum did, but something that Sora did not do. Sora never underestimates an opponent, and Plum is now learning the harsh reality of that. The Queen of the Sirens has been asleep for over 800 years at this point, before Amela or any of the current Sirens were hypothetically even born. So way back then, 800 years ago, if there was someone in Amela's position that saw the future Queen of the Sirens wager everything by the Covenants and then put herself to an indefinite sleep, what exactly would you do? Well, you would erase the knowledge of how to win the game. The actual way to win this game is not to make the Queen fall in love. That is not what she wagered by the Covenants. That is not the game that she challenged people to. And so it's likely that even Amela doesn't know how to wake up the Queen. And that's why she felt so confident using the Queen's game as a trap to lure in unsuspecting victims. But now Sora lays it on pretty thick, looking at Plum and saying, now we don't even have to do a thing. Do you know what the ultimate way to win a game is? Plum glances over to him, and Sora simply says, by default. We don't even have to try to beat the Queen's game, and it will automatically be our win. And with this, Plum hangs her head, completely and utterly defeated. Unaware of who it was that they had lured into their trap, Amela and Plum had made enemies of blank. People who should never be made an enemy of, who had taken all of the necessary precautions to figure out exactly what they were planning and plan 2 steps ahead. And now, Sora and Shiro desperately have to find a bathroom. So they run off down the beach to try to find an outhouse or something, somewhere to relieve themselves. Well, Sora, at least. Shiro is going to go pick flowers. And this leaves Steph, the Shrine Maiden, Izuna, and Plum alone. Izuna, all this time, had not been feeding on any of the fish. In fact, when it was offered to her, she had refused. And now that everyone was alone, Steph had another thought. What about Ino? The person who they'd left behind. And the Shrine Maiden looks back at her coldly. There is naught for it. To which Jabril, who is also still present, agrees. With the sacrifice of a single life, an entire 2 races can be won. Steph thinks that that's far too cruel. She remembers the past couple weeks that she had spent with Ino, how much he had been by her side, had helped her with the nobles of Elkia, and had gone through all of the turmoil trying to establish the Commonwealth of Elkia, to bring the werbeasts and humanity together. She can't deny that this is the simplest way, the most logical way to bring the 2 races together, but she can't help but feel that it is wrong. The Shrine Maiden continues further, saying that the needs of the many will always outweigh the needs of the few. To try to appease everyone equally is impossible. It is a fantasy, and Steph even realizes that herself, that it's the same with the nobles in Elkia. They all wanted everything for themselves. They all wanted their own cut of the pie, but they were rightfully denied. You can't appease everyone, and yet still, Steph thought this was wrong. And then, of course, there's Izana, who had been sitting idly by. Steph gingerly asks Izana if she's okay with this. And Izana responds that her grandfather smelled good in the end. She knew the entire time. And Steph thinks back to after they had finished playing on the beach. Sora and Ino had fought over the opportunity to groom Izana's tail. And Izana, even though she hates Ino's petting, had sat down in front of her grandfather without hesitation, because she knew that this would be the last opportunity that she would have to have her grandfather groom her tail. She knew all along that this was going to happen. Everyone knew, except for Steph. Even in the darkness, Steph could tell that Izana was crying. And Izana continued further, saying that even though her grandfather smelled good, she doesn't understand. Sora and Shiro said that no one would suffer, and yet she's suffering right now, and she wonders if something is wrong with her. At Steph seeing a child made to suffer, seeing that this is how Werbeast had always done things. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. This was how things had always been done. But still, something in the core of Steph's very being said that this is not enough. This would never be enough to unite all of the races. The current mark cannot achieve this goal. And at that point, Sora and Shiro return from picking daisies, and they are met by an angry Steph, who yells at them saying that she's lost what little respect that she had for them. And Sora has no idea why Steph is angry at him, so he kind of just brushes it off and continues the conversation but before, saying that, alright, well, now our current objective is finding how to wake up that queen. The methods may not be known by anyone currently alive, but there has to be some record of it somewhere. Much to Steph's surprise, and she asks Sora, I thought you were going to abandon Ino. To which Sora responds wildly, how could we ever abandon that man among men? It seems that, actually, because of Ino's performance in the romance game of the dream, Sora's opinion of Ino had in fact been raised into the stratosphere. Sora calls Steph a Steph, essentially saying, how could we ever abandon him, you idiot? To which Steph then points out, well, the Shrine Maiden had said that there's not for it, that essentially there's nothing that can be done about it. And Sora says, well, of course. The Shrine Maiden's not going to do anything about it because that's our job now. The Shrine Maiden has used the heck out of her Bloodbreak, something that puts her very life at risk. Her task is done in all this. Now it's our job. It's our turn to fight like hell, to fight like we want to die, to literally put our lives on the line. That's what it means to fight together, right? And that is why it felt so wrong to Steph that they were going to abandon Ino. Because abandoning Ino to win 2 races, that was the sensible thing to do. But blank, Sora and Shiro never abide by sensibilities. Their strategies, their ideas, their plans for Disboard go beyond what is already known, go beyond what is sensible, and go beyond what is expected. Izuna, who had been listening to this the entire time, her ears perked up and she runs to Sora and asks him if he really will save her grandfather. Sora, who can tell that Izuna was crying, but didn't exactly know why, pats her on the head and said, "Of course we'll save your grandfather. I promise." And Shiro then turns to Izuna and says, "Trust my brother." We hear a little bit of Shiro's inner monologue at this point, where she reiterates that those words from Sora mean more than Izuna could ever know. When Sora says, "I promise," when he makes a promise, it is something that is unbreakable to him. He will not break his promises. And Izuna can sense that there is no lie among either of them. And so she agrees and says that she will trust them. This just goes to show that Izuna, even after Lover Loved 2, after Sora had said, "Hey, no one's gonna suffer," and Izuna had been able to tell that Sora and Shiro weren't lying at that point in time, she still didn't have full and absolute trust in them. It takes time for that trust to be built, and it's good that the light novels are actually taking the time to show that. Events are happening where Izuna and the Shrine Maiden are still doubting Sora and Shiro. And speaking of the Shrine Maiden, she, at this point, starts walking away from the group. Her task is already done, after all, and she also needs to recover from her blood break. But when Sora and Shiro are saying that they will save Ino, she also cannot sense any lie. And she wonders to herself if Sora and Shiro realized that she was testing them. She knew in her heart that undoubtedly, if she was in the exact same position, she would have abandoned Ino without a second thought. Asking for more would have been too much. That is as far as her convictions would take her. And yet Sora and Shiro flew past her convictions without a care in the world. They truly see no difference between the races. There is no boundaries that they cannot cross. In fact, they just don't even see those boundaries to begin with. And so the Shrine Maiden considers that maybe she can, in fact, leave it to them. But to find out what that may be, we'll have to wait until later on. For now, we cut back to the gathering around the campfire, where Jabril apologizes to Steph that she actually did know what Sora and Shiro had already intended, but she couldn't help but seeing what Steph's reaction would be if they thought they were abandoning Ino. Jabril's morbid curiosity getting the better of her. And now, with everyone on the same page, their task is set. They need to discover how to wake up the Queen. Sora tasks Steph and Izuna to go look over the old king's journals again in his hidden library. Given that the previous continental domain of Elkia, the ones that were lost in the games with the werebeasts way back in the old king's day, did actually border on Oceans, Sora thinks it's pretty likely that the old king looked into Ocean and the game that the queen had set up. Even if he didn't figure out the exact answer to it and knew the exact conditions, Sora thought it likely that the old king had some ideas and some theories on it at the very least. This shows that Sora does indeed have a lot of faith in Steph's grandfather. One more thing for hopefully renewing Steph's faith in Sora after she thought that he was going to abandon Ino. And that leaves the remainder of the group, Sora, Shiro, Jabril, and Plum, to go to another location to find more information. And it's with this that Sora corrects one more thing that Steph had said. Earlier on, she had said that they would sacrifice Ino to win 2 races. Now, of course, sacrificing Ino, that was completely false. They would never do that. But it's not actually 2 races that will be won. In fact, it is 3. As Sora turns to his companions and says they are going to go to gather more information. Where do you think would be the best place to do that? Met with various reactions, very opposing reactions from both Jabril and Plum, Sora announces, "Let us go to Avantheim." Jabril kneels faster than the speed of sound as she praises that the new Lord of the Flugel will now take his throne. Meanwhile, Plum is screaming, not wanting to go to the den of monsters. What we started off as an arc to save both Exceed Rank 12 and Exceed Rank 15, the Dampier and the Siren, will in fact be a grand game to not only capture both of those races, but also exceed Rank 6, the Flugel. As this volume comes to a close, and Volume 5 will head to Avontheim, where Sora and Shiro will take on the Angels of Death, the Flugel, who were the terrors of the Great War, and the race that all others on Disboard fear. So, that's a hell of a cliffhanger for this volume to live off on. And honestly, when I started reading the light novels, I started off with volumes 1 to 3, which covered all of the stuff from the anime, and then reading volume 4, it was really enjoyable seeing more after the anime. But once we get to this cliffhanger, because the novel actually ends off with Sora saying, "Let us go to Avontheim," I couldn't pick up volume 5 fast enough, because, you know, the Flugel are a lot of people's favorite race on Disboard. Everyone loves the murderous angel girls that exist. And now, we are going straight into the den of the angels, straight into the den of the monsters. We are going to Avontheim in Volume 5, and that's something you all get to look forward to next week. Well, the prologue to that volume, at least. I can't guarantee we're actually going to get straight to Avontheim right away, but it's something to look forward to. And if you want to make sure that you get notified when those videos come out, make sure to subscribe to the Daily Flugel. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I hope it's getting you excited for what's to come in No Game No Life, and maybe pick up the light novels yourself. I highly encourage everyone to do so, as even though I am covering, you know, the major plot points that happen throughout the chapters of the light novel, there is so much more to gain if you pick up the light novel and read it for yourselves, because there's a lot still that I have yet to cover. So, I highly encourage everyone to do so. And with that being said, if you guys want to talk to me live, want to discuss about No Game No Life, or anything else for that matter, I also stream on Twitch a couple times a week and would love to see you there. But with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Ashente.